What happens when one of music's most fearless icons sits down with a late-night host who's already facing mounting criticism for his increasingly aggressive interviewing style? You won't believe what unfolds when Cher stepped onto the late night. With Seth Meyers' set last night, expecting a standard promotional appearance, only to find herself in the middle of a verbal battleground that would leave viewers stunned and social media exploding with outrage. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two entertainment powerhouses collide in what can only be described as the most explosive celebrity interview disaster in recent memory. The tension was palpable from the moment Cher walked onto the set. The iconic performer, there to promote her latest project, carried herself with the confidence of someone who survived decades in the entertainment industry. But what she encountered was a Seth Meyers who seemed determined to prove something. His demeanor noticeably different from his usual comedic approach. The studio audience, unaware of the storm brewing, applauded enthusiastically as Cher took her seat across from the host, who had been facing increasing scrutiny for his confrontational tactics with guests. "Cher, welcome to the show," Seth began, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I have to say, at 77, you're still performing, still touring. Some people might wonder when you're going to step aside for the younger generation." The comment hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Cher's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, her famous wit already sharpening in response to what many would later describe as an unnecessarily provocative opening. "Well, Seth, I guess when you're as old as I am, you'll understand that age is just a number. But maybe you should worry about your own relevance first." The audience laughed, but there was an edge to it, a collective sensing that something was different about this interview. Seth's jaw tightened slightly, and those familiar with his recent behind-the-scenes troubles could see the signs of his growing frustration with public criticism about his hosting abilities. "That's interesting," Seth continued, his voice taking on a sharper tone, "because I've been looking at your recent album sales, and they're not exactly what they used to be. Don't you think there's something to be said for knowing when to gracefully exit the stage?" The question was delivered with a smile, but the venom was unmistakable. Cher straightened in her chair, her legendary composure beginning to crack. "Excuse me? Are you seriously sitting there questioning my career longevity? I've been entertaining people since before you were born, and I'll be doing it long after you're forgotten." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful banter they'd come to expect from late-night television. Seth, perhaps emboldened by what he perceived as getting under Cher's skin, pressed forward with the kind of aggressive questioning that had been generating negative headlines for weeks. "I'm just asking the hard questions that people are thinking," Seth replied, his voice rising slightly. "I mean, your last few projects haven't exactly set the world on fire. The critics have been pretty harsh about your acting choices, your music direction. When do you accept that maybe it's time to step back?" Cher's eyes flashed with the kind of fire that had made her a survivor in an industry known for chewing up and spitting out talent. "Hard questions? You call this journalism? This is just rude, Seth. I came here to talk about my work, not to be insulted by someone who's clearly trying to make a name for himself by tearing down people who've actually accomplished something." The tension in the studio was now impossible to ignore. Camera operators exchanged glances, and the show's producers, watching from the control room, were frantically trying to decide whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out for the sake of ratings. Seth, his face flushing with what appeared to be a mixture of embarrassment and anger, doubled down. "I'm not trying to tear anyone down. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about the entertainment industry and the way it coddles aging stars who can't accept reality." "Coddles?" Cher's voice rose, her famous composure finally cracking. "You think I've been coddled? Do you have any idea what I've been through in this business? The discrimination, the ageism, the sexism? And now I have to sit here and listen to you, of all people, lecture me about reality?" The audience was now completely silent, the uncomfortable energy filling the studio like a toxic cloud. Seth, perhaps realizing he'd gone too far, but unable to back down without losing face, continued his assault. "I'm just saying that maybe it's time for you to acknowledge that your best days are behind you. The industry has moved on, and maybe you should too." The words hit like a physical blow. Cher's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hurt, and then a cold, calculating anger that would have intimidated anyone with sense. My best days are behind me. Seth, you're a third-rate comedian who got lucky with a time slot. You're sitting there criticizing me while your own show is hemorrhaging viewers because people are tired of your smug, self-righteous attitude. The comment struck home. Seth's recent ratings decline had been a source of industry gossip for months, and Cher had just aired his dirty laundry on national television. His face darkened, and any pretense of professional courtesy evaporated. At least I'm not desperately clinging to relevance with plastic surgery and desperate comeback attempts. Seth shot back, his voice now openly hostile. You're like a caricature of yourself, Cher. A walking, talking reminder of an era that's long gone. The insult was so personal, so deliberately cruel, that even the studio crew seemed to recoil. Cher stood up slowly, her hands trembling not with fear, but with barely contained rage. How dare you? How dare you sit there and talk to me like that? You're nothing but a bitter little man who's jealous of people who've actually made something of themselves. Seth, now fully committed to this destructive path, stood as well. Jealous? Of what? Of someone who's become a punchline? At least I'm not delusional about my place in the world. The confrontation had reached a boiling point, with both participants now standing, facing each other across the interview desk like gladiators in an arena. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what would undoubtedly become one of the most infamous moments in late-night television history. But this was only the beginning. As Cher's eyes blazed with decades of pent-up frustration at being dismissed and diminished, and Seth's desperation to prove himself as a serious interviewer reached its peak, the stage was set for an even more explosive confrontation that would push both celebrities past the point of no return. The silence in the studio stretched for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the hum of cameras still rolling and capturing every second of this career-defining disaster. Cher remained standing, her chest rising and falling with controlled breathing, while Seth seemed to realize for the first time that he might have crossed a line from which there was no return. But instead of backing down, his ego and the pressure of months of criticism pushed him further into the abyss. You know what, Cher? Seth said, his voice dripping with condescension as he leaned forward on his desk. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't handle honest criticism anymore. You're so used to people kissing your ass that when someone tells you the truth, you fall apart. The words hit the studio like a physical force. Several audience members gasped audibly, and even the usually stoic camera operators looked shocked. Cher's face went through a transformation that was both terrifying and magnificent to witness, the hurt giving way to something primal and powerful. Fall apart. Cher's voice was dangerously quiet now, the kind of calm that precedes a hurricane. Seth, I've survived things that would have destroyed you before you even got started. I've been attacked by critics, by executives, by people who thought they could break me for 50 years. And you think you're going to be the one to do it. Seth, perhaps sensing that he was losing control of the situation but unable to stop himself, pushed forward with the reckless abandon of someone who had nothing left to lose. I'm not trying to break you. I'm trying to wake you up. You're embarrassing yourself, and everyone's too polite to tell you. The audience was now completely silent, the kind of silence that comes with witnessing something that will be talked about for years to come. Cher took a step closer to Seth's desk, her presence commanding the entire studio. Embarrassing myself? Cher's voice began to rise, years of controlled professionalism finally cracking. You want to talk about embarrassing? Let's talk about how you've turned this show into a vanity project for your own insecurities. Let's talk about how you attack your guests because you can't handle the fact that your career is built on other people's failures. Seth stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. My career? At least I'm not desperately trying to relive my glory days. At least I'm not pathetically chasing after relevance like some aging diva who can't accept that the world has moved on. The word diva hung in the air like a slap. It was the kind of dismissive term that had been used to diminish powerful women for decades, and hearing it from Seth's mouth seemed to unlock something ferocious in Cher. Aging diva, Cher's voice, was now loud enough to fill the entire studio. You arrogant little man. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I've won an Oscar, a Grammy, an Emmy, and a Tony. I've sold over 100 million records. I've had #1 hits in 6 consecutive decades. What have you done besides sit behind a desk? and tear people down. Seth's face was now red with a mixture of anger and what looked like panic. The interview had spiraled so far out of control that there was no way to salvage it, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Awards don't mean anything if nobody cares about your work anymore. When was the last time you had a hit song? When was the last time you were in a movie that mattered? You want to know what matters? Cher shot back, her voice now carrying the power that had made her a legend. Respect matters. Dignity matters. And those are things you clearly know nothing about. You're sitting there trying to humiliate me because you think it makes you look important, but all you're doing is showing everyone what a small, petty person you really are. The confrontation had now reached a fever pitch, with both participants locked in a battle of wills that neither seemed willing to lose. Seth, perhaps realizing that he had already destroyed any chance of salvaging his reputation from this disaster, decided to go for broke. Small and petty? You're the one who can't handle a few tough questions. You're the one who's throwing a tantrum because someone finally told you the truth about your career. Maybe if you spent less time getting work done on your face and more time working on your talent, you wouldn't be so defensive. The personal attack on Cher's appearance was the final straw. The studio gasped collectively as if everyone had been struck simultaneously. Cher's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hurt, and then a cold, calculating fury that would have made lesser mortals flee in terror. My face. Cher's voice was now deadly quiet, more threatening than any scream. You want to talk about my face? Let's talk about yours. Let's talk about how you hide behind that desk because you know you're nothing without a script. Let's talk about how you attack women because you're threatened by anyone who's accomplished more than you have. Seth, now clearly in over his head, but unable to stop the momentum of his own destruction, fired back with desperation. I'm not threatened by you. I'm embarrassed for you. You're making a fool of yourself, and everyone watching knows it. Making a fool of myself. Cher stepped even closer to his desk, her presence now dominating the entire set. The only fool here is you. You've destroyed your own show, your own reputation, all because you couldn't handle interviewing a real star. You're not a journalist. Seth, you're not even a comedian. You're just a bitter, jealous man who's finally shown his true colors. The words cut deep, and Seth's composure finally cracked completely. At least I'm not has been desperately clinging to past glory. At least I'm not delusional enough to think people still care about what I have to say. Has been. Cher's laugh was sharp and dangerous. I'm still here, Seth. I'm still working, still performing, still relevant. Where will you be in 5 years? Will anyone even remember your name? The question hit Seth like a physical blow. His recent ratings struggles, the criticism of his hosting abilities, and now this public humiliation were all converging into a perfect storm of career destruction. But instead of retreating, he lashed out with the desperation of a drowning man. At least I won't be a laughingstock. At least I won't be remembered as someone who couldn't gracefully accept that their time was over. The studio was now charged with an energy that felt dangerous, as if the confrontation might actually turn physical. Cher stood there, magnificent, in her fury, while Seth remained behind his desk, using it as a barrier between himself and the force of nature he had awakened. Time over. Cher's voice carried decades of defiance. My time will be over when I say it's over. Not when some failed comedian with a third-rate show decides to make a name for himself by attacking his betters. The insult landed with devastating precision. Seth's face went white, then red, as the full weight of what was happening began to sink in. He had picked a fight with one of the most formidable women in entertainment, and he was losing badly. But the night was far from over, and the most explosive moments were still to come as this confrontation reached its devastating climax. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Every person in the audience sat frozen, witnessing what would undoubtedly go down as one of the most catastrophic interviews in television history. Seth, now visibly shaking with a mixture of rage and what appeared to be dawning horror at what he had unleashed, made the fatal decision to double down one final time. You know what, Cher? Seth's voice cracked slightly as he spoke, his desperation now evident to everyone watching. This is exactly why nobody takes you seriously anymore. You can't handle criticism, you can't handle the truth, and you certainly can't handle being irrelevant. The word irrelevant seemed to echo through the studio like a gunshot. For a moment, Complete silence reigned, and then Cher began to laugh. It wasn't the kind of laugh that suggested amusement. It was the laugh of someone who had finally been pushed beyond the point of caring about consequences. Irrelevant. Cher's voice was, now filled with a dangerous amusement that was somehow more terrifying than her previous anger. Seth, do you want to know what irrelevant looks like? It looks like a talk show host whose ratings are so bad that his own network is considering canceling his show. It looks like someone so desperate for attention that he attacks his guests, because he knows that's the only way anyone will talk about him. The color drained from Seth's face as Cher hit him with information that was clearly supposed to be confidential. The camera caught every micro-expression as the realization dawned that she had just exposed his most closely guarded secret on national television. "How did you?" Seth began, but Cher cut him off with a gesture that was both dismissive and commanding. "How did I know? Because unlike you, I actually have friends in this industry. People talk, Seth. They talk about how you're on thin ice, how the executives are tired of your attitude, how you've alienated half the talent pool with your aggressive interviewing style. They talk about how you're exactly the kind of host that gives late-night television a bad name." Seth's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The public humiliation was complete, but Cher wasn't finished with him yet. "You want to know what's really irrelevant?" Cher continued, her voice now carrying the weight of decades of experience and authority. "It's someone who mistakes cruelty for cleverness. It's someone who thinks tearing people down makes him important. It's someone who's so insecure about his own abilities that he has to attack legends to feel relevant." The audience was now completely transfixed, watching as one of the most powerful women in entertainment systematically dismantled the man who had tried to diminish her. Seth, perhaps finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake, attempted one last desperate counterattack. "At least I'm not living in denial about my place in the world," he said, his voice now barely above a whisper. "At least I'm not pretending to be something I'm not." Cher's response was swift and devastating. "Pretending? Seth, I've never pretended to be anything other than exactly who I am. I've never hidden behind a desk or a script or a fake smile. I've never needed to tear other people down to build myself up. That's the difference between a real star and someone who's just playing one on television." The words landed with the force of a sledgehammer. Seth's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hurt, and then a kind of defeated acceptance that suggested he finally understood the full scope of his professional suicide. "You've spent this entire interview trying to prove that you're some kind of serious journalist," Cher continued, her voice now carrying the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "But all you've proven is that you're a small, bitter man who's jealous of people who've actually accomplished something with their lives." Seth stood there, swaying slightly, as if the weight of his own actions was finally crushing him. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. And then, in a moment that would be replayed thousands of times on social media, Cher delivered the final blow. "You know what the saddest part is, Seth? You could have been remembered as the host who interviewed Cher. Instead, you'll be remembered as the host who got destroyed by Cher. You'll be remembered as the man who was so threatened by a woman's success that he tried to tear her down and ended up destroying himself instead." The prophecy in her words was unmistakable. Seth's career, his reputation, his entire professional identity was crumbling in real time, broadcast live to millions of viewers who would never forget what they had witnessed. "This interview is over," Cher declared, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades commanding stages and screens around the world. "I came here to talk about my work, to share my passion with your audience. Instead, I've been subjected to the kind of juvenile, misogynistic attack that I thought we'd moved beyond." She began to remove her microphone, her movements deliberate and dignified despite the chaos she was leaving in her wake. "I've been in this business for over 50 years, and I've never walked out of an interview. But there's a first time for everything." Seth, perhaps finally realizing that he needed to salvage something from this disaster, made one final, desperate attempt to regain control. "Cher, wait. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can start over." Cher turned back to him, and the look she gave him was one of such complete disdain that several audience members actually gasped. "Start over? Seth, some things can't be undone. Some words can't be taken back. And some people reveal who they really are when they think no one important is watching." She dropped her microphone on the chair, the sound echoing through the studio, like a gavel falling. The problem is, everyone was watching. Everyone heard you. Everyone saw what kind of man you really are. And now everyone will know. As she walked toward the exit, her heels clicking on the studio floor with the rhythm of a funeral march, the audience began to stir. Some were whispering, others were pulling out their phones, and a few were actually applauding Cher's dignified exit. You want to know what a real star looks like? Cher called back over her shoulder, not bothering to turn around. A real star knows when to make an exit. A real star doesn't stick around to watch someone else's career die. The studio doors closed behind her with a finality that seemed to echo through the entire building. Seth stood there, alone behind his desk, facing an audience that was now openly hostile. Cameras that had captured every moment of his humiliation and the crushing realization that he had just committed professional suicide on live television.in. The control room, producers scrambled to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show, but the damage was already done. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation would be spreading across social media like wildfire. Within hours, entertainment. News outlets would be running stories about the interview that ended a career. Within days, Seth Meyers would be facing the consequences of trying to diminish a legend and learning, too late, that some people are legends for a reason. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, having witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. They had come expecting entertainment, and instead had witnessed the complete destruction of a television host's career at the hands of one of the most formidable women in show business. As the credits rolled over the chaos, one thing was crystal clear. Cher had entered the studio as a guest and left as a conqueror, while Seth Meyers had started the night as a host and ended it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of mistaking cruelty for courage and arrogance for authority.